Welcome to the nurseMARK podcast. This is your host, nurseMARK. We cover all things health, happiness, cannabis. I've done a lot of things in my life. Joined the Marines when I was 17, welcomed my first baby at 22, started my own business at 25. I've been a certified yoga instructor, a Eucharistic minister. I've even sang with a symphony orchestra and was recorded at one of the top 10 venues in the world. I finished nursing school while running a multi-million-dollar business, and most recently became a level 1 certified CrossFit coach and cannabis nurse. You get the idea. So why nurseMARK? Why health, happiness, cannabis? Because I have a little secret not too many people know about. I've battled lifelong depression and mood swings. I actively sought out various ways to deal with my issues because, you see, my depression isn't effectively treated with medication. I had to find alternative ways to deal with it, and I worked hard to get where I am. Where I am is living the most amazing life with no depression. I'm here to share my experiences, to explore in depth the tools like exercise, mindfulness, nutrition, and cannabis. We'll explore what it means to create a life you may only dream of today. That's why I'm here. I want you to have what I have. So sit back and enjoy. I promise you won't be disappointed. My guest today on the nurseMARK podcast is Eloise Theisen. Eloise is a board-certified adult geriatric nurse practitioner with over 20 years' experience in nursing. Prior to cannabis, Eloise worked for about 14 years in oncology at John Muir. She started her own cannabis practice about 5 years ago, and she has treated over 5,000 patients using cannabis. Eloise was possibly the first healthcare provider to bring a clinical dosing regimen to the cannabis space and has assembled the knowledge and data to use cannabis to treat a broad range of conditions and disease, especially those that commonly afflict seniors: pain, insomnia, anxiety, and depression. There are very few healthcare providers nationally with the same level of expertise and experience. Eloise is the President-elect of the American Cannabis Nurses Association for 2019 and will serve as president through 2022. So let's dive right in. Tell me about yourself, your background. How did you get into nursing? Here you are today. You're in the cannabis space and have been there here for a while. What's your background?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it. Any opportunity I get to talk about cannabis is really exciting for me. I started my career in nursing about 20 years ago in oncology. And during that time, I went from working with oncology patients in the hospital setting. I did some hospice and palliative care. I did some chemotherapy infusion. And then I worked my way up the chain and started to become the manager of the oncology unit, followed by becoming the manager of the medical surgical division. So I started managing a couple different units. And then I experienced a pretty severe injury from a car accident that left me disabled for a while. And I was out of nursing for a couple of years. And that was what led me to cannabis. I became a patient first because the pharmaceutical really failed me. Traditional medicine was not offering me any options anymore. And like most of my patients, I became pretty desperate and really felt like I had nothing else to lose at that point. So I decided to consider cannabis as an option for myself. And that was over 6 years ago. And during that time, I was able to actually get off all of my pharmaceuticals, go back to school, become a nurse practitioner, and still thought I would go back into the traditional model. I was doing my clinical hours in oncology again. But every day I had patients asking me about cannabis. You know, as soon as the door closed and we were alone in the room, they would whisper to me, what do you think about cannabis? And so I really started to see how there was a need for patients to have a healthcare professional that helped them navigate through, cannabis as a medicine. So I took kind of a leap of faith and decided to start a practice dedicated to cannabis as a treatment modality. And I did that about 5.5 years ago. And since then, I've just been completely cannabis focused. And last year, I decided to run for president of the American Cannabis Nurses Association, and I was elected.
Yay.
Membership, which was a huge honor. And next year, I will serve as president through 2021. So I'm really excited now to kind of be at the forefront of cannabis nursing.
Yeah, and it's a great, great field to be in. And you are in the forefront for sure. This thing it's just the beginning of the wave, really, I think. So where are you based out of?
I'm in Walnut Creek, California. It's about 20 miles near Oakland.
Okay.
California.
Very cool. So California has actually been on the forefront of cannabis as well. 1996, I think, was the first year, right? Medical marijuana. So California's been on the forefront and still is. And do you think that has a lot to do with why you had more patients actually asking you about cannabis because it had been in place so long in California and they kind of had a little bit of awareness about it?
That's a great question. I think, we've been on the forefront of having a cannabis program for patients since 1996, but the medical community has not been on the forefront of cannabis as a medicine. Mm-hmm. So patients have had to sort of look to their friends or the internet or people in the cannabis industry to get their information. And I think that when they try to do that, it gets very confusing and very overwhelming. And so it just sort of started this trend of patients sort of leading each other. And that's where I think we need to do a better job in California and all states is really have more healthcare practitioners involved from the start when patients are interested in cannabis.
Yeah, it's a good point. People use Dr. Google all the time, and it seems to be their primary care physician is Dr. Google. They go there first, and then they go to their PCP and say, "Hey, I was reading about this." So that has a lot to do with it. It's funny. I do a lot of speaking events around cannabis, and I include a little bit about the history about how it became illegal. And one of the telling things is that the American Medical Association was one of the most adamant opposed to the criminalization of marijuana in 1937. And my thought on that is that there was at that point there was a whole generation of physicians that were in play that had used cannabis as a medicine for many, many years as a very good medicine, and they were really opposed to it. And the offshoot of that is they've all died out. They're gone. So the physicians of today have no knowledge about cannabis as a medicine. And that was just lost, due to time and the legality issues. So I would agree with you that, I find a lot of people in the healthcare space, more primarily on the physician side, to be honest with you, that are kind of hesitant to even talk about it or even consider having a conversation. There are more coming online, every day, just as part of, I guess, the maturity of the industry or the cannabis as a medicine idea. So that's interesting that you came into it through a personal experience where you had an injury and you couldn't tolerate or didn't want to tolerate any of the traditional medications. I ended up in the cannabis field actually through a person who had a similar experience. She had breast cancer and couldn't tolerate opiates, pain, and turned to cannabis, found cannabis, and determined that she couldn't really find any quality products. So she started a company to kind of help people out with that. And so I was introduced to her, and that's how my introduction to cannabis. Of course, I had no training in nursing school about cannabis. It's not talked about other than it. In my nursing school career, it was, hey, it's illegal and we don't talk about it. So it's interesting to see that.
Illegal,
What's that?
Not only is it illegal, but it's bad.
Yeah, it's bad. See, that's the thing. But I see in my, in my world, there are a lot more people interested in it in the nursing area. Nurses are much more interested in having the conversation and trying to understand, really what's going on in cannabis as a medicine. And I think that it has to do with they're working directly with the patients much longer than a physician would be. So, it's really interesting. One thing that I found out that at a recent conference, I went to the International Cannabis Research Conference in Pueblo, Colorado at the State University. And so it was all PhD researchers. And one of them worked for a pretty well-known college in the United States in the medical school. And she was a physician and a researcher. And I asked her, why aren't they teaching, about the endocannabinoid system and in cannabis in medical school? And she said it's pretty simple. They changed their format on how they do instruction in medical schools, and they went to an organ case-based methodology of teaching. So really overall systems are no longer taught. Like endocrine is not taught as a subject. It's only as it relates to a particular organ. So she said it was really difficult to get anything on the curriculum like the endocannabinoid system. So it's kind of really interesting. So what's it been like working with patients? You've been doing it 5 years.
Mm-hmm. It's probably the most rewarding work I've ever done. I actually, when I set out to be a nurse, I think we all get a little idealistic. We're going to help patients. We're going to get them to feel better. We're going to do this great work. And I think we often experience, moral fatigue because we're not actually helping them improve. We just be watching them get worse and worse. And with cannabis, I actually see people recover. They get their lives back and they are able to engage again in things that they hadn't engaged in for years. And so that part for me is by far the most rewarding. It's also the hardest work I've ever done because of the medical community's resistance and flat out ignorance around it. I get a lot of pushback from local practitioners about the work that I'm doing. I've never felt so unsupported by my own community, my peers before. So as much as we can come together as a community of healthcare practitioners, this is an area where I've really felt like I've had to go out there and just focus on my patients and put my head down and not listen to what other medical community thinks about the work that I'm doing, and know that eventually my patients will become evangelists for me because of their. Yeah,
absolutely. You're absolutely right. And, kudos to you for being on the forefront and having to, run that gauntlet and actually carry the torch, because it's not easy, right? You want support from everybody that you work with.
You do.
It is. It's tough. But, to their defense, it's like cognitive dissonance. You can't provide any information that's going to change their mind because they've been immersed in this training of, hey, I've got to have a pharmaceutical remedy for whatever this is. And I'm always going to look to that pharmaceutical remedy and not outside of that. And, that brings up all the rest of the sort of the alternative treatments like acupuncture and Eastern medicine, all of these things that, most of us in the Western medical world kind of put down or don't look at. Although it has gotten better in the last 20 years, I think you'd agree. There's validity, I think, in a lot of these other things that people in our Western healthcare system are kind of maybe embracing a little bit more. So here you are, you're carrying the torch, and that's going to be cannabis in the future. Fingers crossed, we all just keep pushing. And it does come down to education. I think you'd agree, because you've got, I personally have taken your curriculum. You have a training curriculum, which is, hands down the best that I've seen. And really, I learned a lot of in-depth information from that. Talk about that a little bit. How'd you come up with the idea for the curriculum? And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, thank you for that feedback. I appreciate that. We do feel we have the most comprehensive curriculum out there. It was sort of the result out of necessity, getting a lot of the, can I pick your brain? I want to do what you do kind of questions from other nurses. And I decided that, I had an opportunity here to put together, coursework for them that would, give them an opportunity to learn and relieve a little bit of that burden from myself. So my business partner and co-owner of Radicle Health, his background is curriculum development and technical writing. And so he was really excited about the work I was doing in the cannabis space. And we decided we would work on this together. So it's been about 2.5 years in the making. And we now have 8 modules. We cover topics from the endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids, terpenes, routes of administration, assessment, dosing, myths. We have a very in-depth pharmacology module that we're very proud of. And then we also have a chronic pain and geriatric module. And we're currently working on a cancer and neurological module that will be coming out hopefully by the end of this year. So it's currently a 4-hour self-paced curriculum that you can sign up for online. And that is a year subscription. So anytime we change the content or add new content, if you're within that year, you automatically get that new content. And we can offer CEs if nurses are interested in that. And then we also have a 5-week webinar where we take that 4-hour self-paced curriculum and apply it to practice. So we meet for an hour and a half for 5 weeks. So it's a total of 7.5 hours of meeting time. Plus you get some one-on-one mentorship with me. And at the end of that, it's really designed to help nurses kind of launch into the cannabis space and start working in the industry.
Great. Fabulous. And that's what we need, are more nurses working in this industry, because I've seen it have just a huge positive effect for people. And as you say, you actually, have people experience life in a way that they haven't been able to in many, many years. And that's magical. I mean, that's what we're in it for. And, to see that happen is just amazing.
Yeah.
It's, you mentioned seniors, and, one statistic that I recently read in all the recreational states. Now, here in Massachusetts, we finally, after 2 or 3 years of, we authorized recreational marijuana and cannabis in the state, we finally had some dispensaries open last November. And from November till now, they've done 100 million in sales. That's pretty good for a small state. I had read that in all of the recreational states, the largest demographic of people who are using cannabis are between the ages of 40 and 70. So that's very telling to me that it's not necessarily, the get high marketplace, the demographic. I mean, these people are looking to cannabis to make themselves feel better. And so you work with a lot of seniors on these types of things. I actually spoke at a assisted living facility yesterday. Average age in the room was probably 80, and it was amazing. And they had the greatest questions, and were really interested on trying to figure out, will this help me sleep? Will this decrease my anxiety? There was some Parkinson's patients in the room. And they're like, will this help me? And so it was really, really just amazing to be in the room with them and try to give them information and education, help them sort of navigate to maybe being able to use this. Talk about your experience with seniors. How have you been approaching that and working with folks?
Well, I am a board-certified adult geriatric nurse practitioner, so I, naturally get quite a few geriatric patients. The average age of my patient in my clinic is 76.
Wow.
So about 90% of them are brand new to cannabis, or what I'd call cannabis naive. And actually about 80 to 85% of them are female. And they're primarily looking for symptom relief, pain, anxiety, sleep. I also get some patients with neurological conditions like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, and of course, cancer patients because of my background. And, I do a lot of boots on the ground here locally. I go out to the senior centers. That we were very fortunate here in Walnut Creek to have a community called Rossmore. It's a retirement community of over 10,000 retirees. Their second largest club is their medical marijuana club.
Wow.
So they have over 1,000.
So cool.
They have over 1,000 members at this point. They meet monthly and they host educational meetings. And so, there's a disconnect right now because seniors are the fastest growing demographic of cannabis users. They're also, if you look at the average age of my patient at 76, it makes sense why they're cannabis naive. They were busy raising kids or having careers where they didn't really experiment or explore cannabis back in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
They are trying to come to cannabis as a medicine. And what legalization has done in these states is given them permission to explore it. But often their first interaction is at a dispensary where they're not being properly evaluated for, the type of cannabinoid and terpene profile or even route of administration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as an industry, we need to come together with the medical community and the cannabis community and really come up with a plan that provides these patients with good support so that they can be successful. We can track this data. We can provide feedback to these manufacturers and say, here's what's working in this population. Here's not what's working. Let's look at new formulations.
Mm-hmm.
We really have an opportunity to come together and help each other, help patients on a much bigger level. But I did a recent survey locally and found that some of these dispensaries are spending 30 to 60 minutes with a new senior patient who comes into their dispensary.
Mm-hmm.
So that is probably a huge burden on these companies in terms of trying to staff it and creating long lines and things like that. So if we want them to be successful, we got to get them on the right track right away.
Right. Do you see nurses becoming an integral part of the dispensary system? Do you see us working with them, like directly in trying to help coach people who come in?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that as a possibility? I do. I think that would be amazing. It would be great.
I do too. I think
integration.
the challenge right now that dispensaries. Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
No. I said I think it would be great to have that integration between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the disconnect right now is that nurses are seen as an expense, right?
Mm-hmm.
We typically have a wage that is much larger than the dispensary staff right now.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do think that you could justify that cost because you'll increase patient retention, brand loyalty with these patients. You'll probably improve employee satisfaction as well because you have somebody there who's willing to educate these consumers, these healthcare consumers that want to use it. Right. And so there are some nurses on the East Coast that are integrated into dispensaries right now. There's a couple on the West Coast as well. I think it's absolutely necessary for us to show cannabis is a medicine. You have to, nurses we outnumber physicians 5 to 1. You want physicians on board, you get those nurses in there, they're the conduit.
Absolutely.
We're the ones that are going to bridge that gap and, really bring legitimacy to this as a medicine and help these companies succeed.
I agree wholeheartedly. And it's exciting. Again, it's exciting to be part of this whole new push for health and happiness with people. And again, going back to that 40 to 70-year-old demographic group and older, I don't think they're in the recreational market. I think they're in the market to feel better, not party it up. And I think that's one of the misconceptions of most people who are opposed to cannabis is that, it's all just about getting high. And it's just another thing that they have to worry about. What do you get as pushback from? Yeah, I know. What do you get for pushback from the healthcare community? What are you seeing as like the greatest, complaints that they have about moving to cannabis as a medicine?
Oh God, where do I begin?
I know. I've heard everything. It's crazy.
I know. Usually research. I had a really great moment the other day. I always get, there's not enough research. And then the other day I had a patient who was using it for appetite stimulation and actually had gained some weight. And the physician had said, you can come off of it now. And the patient said, well, I want to stay on it for its anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective qualities. And the physician said, well, there's no research to verify that that's true. And I said, the research is weak on appetite stimulation as well. If you look at the National Academy of Sciences, they say it's inconclusive. So it's just a moment where I was like, I'm so tired of that, dialogue. We have tons of research.
Yeah.
The other is that it's a gateway drug, that it's going to lead to, increasing the opioid epidemic.
The gateway drug theory? Oh, yeah. Please, let's just talk about that for a minute. That is a complete and utter myth. Right? I mean, you talk about it in your training. It's just a myth. There is no such thing. They have never. So, oh my gosh, if that were true, then there would have been evidence-based research that conclusively could prove it, right? It just baffles my mind that we're still having this conversation. And I think I have to kind of give my opinion here on research in general. I mean, what we know about the human body, we like to think that we know a whole bunch about it and that we're really experts in the human body, but really ultimately we know so very little about, how we operate as an organism. And research at best, even the best research is still kind of a best guess because you're different than I am than we are for the 7.5 billion other people in the world. My fingerprints are different than yours. My retinal scan, my cellular structure, the receptors in my body are going to be different. So at a base level, research, evidence-based research is just flawed from that very basic moment of trying to compare two people who are really different. So it comes down to best guess. And I really do believe in research. I think that, it's a lot of great things have come from it and we continue to do it. But to say that because there's no research that's proven it conclusively, I think is a huge flaw because there's been research in the past, right? If you think about the medical industry as a whole, there's been research in the past that conclusively proved X. And then 20 years later, another research comes out that says, oh yeah, we were wrong about that. It's not true. Sorry. 20 years we believed this to be the case. And now, we wwere wrong. Remember when the world was flat? Like thousands of years, everybody believed the earth was flat. And when people went away, they never came back. They went over the edge and fell off. Yeah, not true. I believe that the earth is round now. So, I think you probably do too. Although I haven't been able to prove it because I haven't been to space to actually look down and see it. I believe that story to be true. The same with all of this. I mean, cannabis, the anecdotal evidence alone from the, millions of people who use it with great results is just too much to ignore, I think, at this point. Hence the reason we're here, because we see it actually work for people. So where's it going to go from here?
That's a great question. I think the train has left the station for legalization. I think legalization is just going to continue to happen in different states. I would love to see legalization on a national level. I think it will increase, obviously, access for patients. Right now, we call it medicine by zip code, right? You can only get certain medicine.
Yeah.
If you have certain qualifying conditions, in some states, you're likely to pay $1,000 a month because of overregulation. In some states, you can have access to, hundreds of products. So, insurance can start covering it. Patients can have decreased
and that's a good
out-of-pocket expenses.
The cost, I mean, it's not covered by insurance and, so it can get costly using cannabis. It really can. And that's an issue for folks. Especially the senior demographic. I mean, they're on fixed income and it's not like they have, unlimited resources to be able to throw at this. And yet they do, they find a way to make it happen because it actually works for them. So they understand that, it's the price to pay, but it would be great if we had that capability to have insurance cover it. but I think it's a while off. What do you think?
It feels like everything moves in slow motion in this industry. It's never fast enough for me. I want things yesterday. I think especially if, our current administration, I don't think is going to address it. I don't know if the next president, if in 2020, if we get a new president, if they will address it. So I think right now each state is just going to decide for themselves what to do. And that's hard.
It is hard. Yeah, it really is. And you're right. It's by zip code, and it's the craziest thing. Being in this industry for the last year and a half, at a very ground level, it's just crazy out there what's going on. But it'll get better.
I think so. I think
we legitimize it, and we, really professionalize it. I love the fact that there's an American Cannabis Nurses Association, of which I'm a proud member. And I just absolutely love that we are professionalizing the cannabis as a medicine industry, and we'll keep working together and make it happen. What's been your biggest surprise? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just saying, we have over 1,200 members in 48 states right now. So even in some prohibition states, we have nurses who are joining the association because they want to know how they can get involved and talk to their legislators and start to make some changes. And it's really a grassroots, effort right now, which is exciting. We're really, building an industry right now for nurses and working towards credentialing and trying to, like you said, bring professionalism and legitimacy to this type of practice for our patients.
Awesome. So powerful. So what's been your biggest surprise in working in this field? I'm sure there have been a lot.
Wow, that's a great question. I would say for me, it's been how hard it is to even through education to get some practitioners on board. When you start to talk about the endocannabinoid system and to say to them, there's a science behind this, there's still a disconnect. Or when you say our patients are using it, we really need to become educated. There's a lot of dismissal around that. And that to me is surprising because I've always been, a clinician who, if you offer me something that's going to help my patients, I want that in my toolbox. And there's such a resistance to it, largely because it's federally illegal. And I understand the complexities for, healthcare professionals, why they feel like they can't get involved or engaged. But we are 3.9 million strong in the United States. Nurses are. We can be really powerful when we want to. And if we want to have change, we have to have a seat at the table. We need to show up.
Right. Right.
It's not so nice.
Yeah.
We're too nice.
Oh my gosh. We're at the beginning stages. It's just it's such an opportunity to help people, and it's exciting. So you've mentioned the endocannabinoid system a few times. Why don't you, for the listeners, give a little description of that? What are we talking about when we talk an endocannabinoid system?
We are talking about the most important regulatory system in our body. We now know that the endocannabinoid system has the largest receptors out of any other system. And its whole goal of the endocannabinoid system is to maintain homeostasis or balance. So it's regulating things like our mood, our appetite, our sleep, our pain perception, and our memory. And when this system becomes dysfunctional or out of balance, we do believe that's why we see some of these chronic conditions that really have had no other known source, like fibromyalgia, irritable bowel, migraines, to name a few. So I think that, when we talk about the science behind cannabis, when you learn about the endocannabinoid system, I think it's hard to deny how important it is and how cannabis can play a large role in restoring homeostasis to the system.
Yeah, I think people, when I talk about it, people are surprised to learn that our bodies create cannabinoids on their own. I mean, it's part of that system, and as you said, it's the largest number of receptors as a whole in our body. Yeah. And people are kind of shocked to figure that out. When they hear, this what? So we're talking about all natural, and then a plant that has the same chemical compounds. So it starts to make sense why cannabis can have a positive effect in so many different areas. I think that's another thing that people just don't believe. Oh my gosh, it could have a potential positive effect in all of these different areas. Like, how could that be? Because we're so used to hearing this medicine will solve this little issue, this one thing. Oh, and it'll also cause a few other ones, but this one thing it'll address, a pharmacological remedy. And then, with cannabis, it's like checking these boxes. It could be all of these. It could have a positive effect on all of these different areas. But once you understand, how that endocannabinoid system works in the body, it's just wow, it's so powerful. So do you spend a lot of time talking about that with other clinicians and with patients, just kind of educating? Is that probably all that you do, right? You're like, oh, let me tell you about this.
That's interesting. I mean, it kind of ties into the last question you asked. What's the biggest surprise? I did a talk last Friday to 120 oncology nurses. And the first question I asked them was, how many of you have patients who are asking you about cannabis? And probably all but 5 people raised their hand. And then I said, how many of you have heard of the endocannabinoid system? And then it was the opposite. About 5 people raised their hand.
Yeah.
And then I started to talk about it, and their eyes were glazed over. They were just like, it was almost like when we first found out about the immune system and we're trying to teach nurses about immunity, and you're like, wait, ligands, receptors, what?
I know that glazed look.
So
I had it.
Typically, we'll give a very brief overview, because what they want to know is what's out there. How do my patients use it? What are the side effects? What are the risks? How can I be applying this to my practice? And then if they want to geek out on the endocannabinoid system, they can do that later. So I'm really learning. It's a little too much for them.
Yeah. I when I first started doing speaking events, I would go way down in the weeds because that's what I love. Like I just go in 100%. I'm like, oh yeah, tell me about every little chemical reaction and everything that's happening. Yeah, and I'd get that glazed look. Everybody in the room would be like, oh man, you I don't even know where you're at this point. So I had to kind of back up and make like a an endocannabinoid system 101. It's just like, this is this and this, and I won't go really deep in, but it gives them enough of a base of information to say, okay, yeah, right, this makes sense. And then if they want to, like you said, if they want to deep dive and be geeky and do all that stuff that I know I love so much, they can do it because the information's out there.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's educational at this point, right? That's what we're doing. We're mainly doing is we're educating people on the fact that this all exists. So cannabis is a plant. I mean, we're 100 years behind soybean and corn and all these other plants that agriculture has been working on and creating strains for. And so it's very interesting to me that we have, different strains that contain, different terpenes and THC versus CBD content. You get very granular with your recommendations for patients as far as these different strains that are out there?
It depends. California just passed regulations. When we voted on legalization in 26, we had many steps in place that would lead to improvements in things like testing. And terpenes are now a required testing component of the cannabis plant. Mm-hmm. And so that really, we probably won't start to see that enforced until later this year, probably towards the end of summer. That's when I can start educating patients on cannabinoid and terpene profiles to help them match these specific strains to their conditions. Because it's really hard to tell them to go pick out Obama OG and give them any confidence in a name like that it's going to help provide them, with pain relief.
Right. I know. The naming construct isn't one to lend itself to like medicine. It's like, lemon haze and
but we have to work with what we have right now.
We do. I mean, it is made for the recreational market. That's why they do these crazy names. But you're right. Behind the crazy name is a really powerful plan. So, kind of helping people get there is important, right?
Yeah. The more educated they are, the more they can help themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really part of the messaging that I give is that you're your own advocate. You're the one who knows best for you, and in this case, you're going to have to take the lead in with help, figure out what's going to work best for you, and you can really get there. You can really get there.
You can, yeah. They need a lot of hand holding, but they can get there.
Yeah. And as you said, there's a lot of cannabis naive people who are really looking for this. What I find is a lot of people who weren't necessarily cannabis naive, but it had been an awful long time since they had used cannabis. And so now, they're coming back into the cannabis marketplace and saying, specifically in Massachusetts, because it's rec, they're going to the dispensary and saying, well, you know what? I really want to sleep better. Like I'm having trouble with my sleep. I'm going to try this, and they'll buy an edible. They'll buy some raw product, and they'll use it and have a very negative experience because the THC level is so much higher than it was when 35, 40 years ago when they used it past. So they have a story, and I hear that story. It's like, oh my gosh, I had a panic attack. It was horrible. And, for a lot of people, they get scared to try it again. And so it's an education process again, where we say, it's biphasic. So too much will cause anxiety and, a smaller amount will not. And it'll give you a much more beneficial effect. You kind of talk about your experiences with that. And, what do you advise patients when they're first getting started in this sort of cannabis world?
Yeah, I think that the average serving size in a dispensary in a new user is too big. Even 5 milligrams in a new user can be likely to produce some of those adverse effects that you described. And then when you get in the senior population where they have changes in their metabolism, they're on multiple medications, then you're also going to see probably more side effects related to that. So my low and slow approach is not only a very low dose, but very slow increases. Like you wait 3 days before you even consider increasing your dose. Not 2 hours, not 3 hours, 3 days, so that they can build confidence with it. They can assess how they're responding to it. And then, I'm like, look, you may be angry at me that you're not seeing any results in the first week, but I'd rather you have that experience than have the experience where you'll never touch it again.
Right. Yeah, and that brings up a good point. Dosing is a huge issue at this point, right? Because of replication of product. One batch to the next could be a little bit different. And so it's hard to negotiate that dosing area. So you've worked with 5,000 plus patients. You've worked with dosing a lot. What have you found? I mean, what is it the go low and go slow approach is really like the predominant mantra? That's what you do first, is always start with that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some best practices I think I've developed along the way, where you can see certain cannabinoids that will respond best to certain, symptoms or conditions. There's, average dosages that we're finding that are, helpful in probably, 65% of patients. So there's definitely best practices that can start to be developed out of something like this. And, if we could start doing some genetic testing on our patients to evaluate how they metabolize cannabis, If the people bring me that information ahead of time, sometimes I can actually hone in on their dosages and routes of administration really quickly. It happened yesterday. It was just lovely. She brought it in and I said, you're going to build a tolerance to cannabis really quickly. And she was already experiencing that. So at least it explained to her what was going on because, people get frustrated. Their friends are using it. They're having success. Why am I not there?
Mm-hmm.
So to say, well, everybody's different. They don't want that.
Everybody's different. Our receptors are different than somebody else's receptors. And that changes, by the way, on a fairly regular basis, right? Depending on what's going on in the body, they're going to be expressed or not.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Talk to me about the genetic side of things. I took one of the companies that offers genetic profiling for cannabis. I took their test using some Ancestry.com data. I'd taken the Ancestry DNA stuff, and so they produced a report. And I kind of felt it was more marketing than it was, like valid information, but I could have been wrong. It could have just been the way it was presented to me. How you think it's valid? Do you think it matters?
Well, I think it depends on
testing.
Yeah, I think it matters what you do with the information. So, for me, it will help if somebody has that information ahead of time. I can determine whether or not they're going to be sensitive to cannabinoids.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're going to be an average metabolizer or if they're a fast metabolizer, then they're going to constantly need higher dosages. It gives me a little bit better framework to start out with.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody's a poor or a challenge has metabolism issues,
mm-hmm.
Then I can really educate them about inhalation and how that's probably going to be their best route of administration.
Right.
Patch. So again, I can kind of get them the right product, the right route a little quicker.
Right.
Dose.
Right. So about route of administration, what's the most common that you see your patients using? Is it still smoking? Is it inhalation? Is it vaping? Is that the number one route of administration for your patients?
Well, they come to me with no experience.
Mm-hmm.
So typically during the consultation, I do educate them on all the different routes of administration that are available.
Mm-hmm.
Their most common requests with me are not to smoke it. They come and they're like, I don't want to smoke it. I don't want to get high. I mean, they're very adamant about that. And I said, well, hear me out.
Yeah.
And sometimes for them, inhalation is the most effective method. They're going to achieve results quickest. They're going to feel most in control. It's going to be the most predictable for them.
Mm-hmm.
And often when they get that sort of feedback, they become much more receptive to inhalation.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, though, that tinctures or the liquid oils are probably the most popular method, followed by inhalation.
Okay. Yeah, that's surprising. I would have thought it was the other way around still, but there are advantages to the tincture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you still have that stigma about smoking it, I guess. Yeah.
They do. Yeah. But they and for some of them, it can be really hard, that concept of inhalation. So they may not be very compliant with it, even if it is the best route, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They'll come in and they'll hold it in their mouth, and they don't actually inhale. So.
Now, as a nurse practitioner, did you ever think you'd be teaching people how to smoke? I know, it's like counterintuitive. You're like, I spent my whole career telling people to stop smoking, and now I'm teaching them to smoke a little bit. But it is, sometimes you're right. Sometimes it's the best method to get this into their system and to have the effect that they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
What's the number one complaint that people are coming to you with that cannabis is having a positive effect?
You mean like as an ailment?
Like it as an ailment. Is it pain? Is it anxiety? Is it Parkinson's? Neurological, immune? I mean, I'm sure you see everybody across the spectrum, but what would be the one that you're probably working with the most?
I would actually say there's a tie between insomnia and chronic pain.
Well, all the things that happen to you as you age. Imagine that. I just turned 57 2 weeks ago. And let me tell you, I told the group yesterday, I grunt when I get out of the car now, involuntarily. Like I make a noise. I like move out of the car. I'm like, did it take that much effort that I now have to make a noise? What is up with this? It's crazy. The thing is, man, stuff hurts, right? I certainly hurt more than I did in my 20s. And so that makes sense to me that that's one of them. And of course, what's the chief complaint that people have as they age? I just don't sleep as well as I used to. I wake up in the middle of the night, whether it's, to get up to pee or whatever it is, for whatever reason, you wake up and it becomes more prevalent as you age. So, wow, that doesn't surprise me that those would be the two that you're working with, given, a lot of your population is in that demographic. So are you having good effect? Are you helping people with their insomnia and their pain?
Yeah, pain is always complex and really depends on the type of pain. There are definitely certain pain conditions that I see lower success rates with, like spinal stenosis would be a good example. Bone pain from metastasis or bone-on-bone pain from osteoarthritis can be extremely difficult to manage with cannabis. Sleep can be relatively easy to do. There are definitely some people who are more complex, and we definitely have gender differences when we're treating with cannabis. Men tend to respond very quickly, just like they tend to lose weight very quickly. And they're not as likely to build a tolerance, whereas females don't respond as quickly and they may need dose adjustments more frequently.
Wow. And what do you attribute that to? Just the differences between male and female hormones or metabolism?
I think it's, yes, I think it's hormonal. I also think it's genetic. I do think it's partly our metabolism. And just the different variations that we can have in how we metabolize things.
So complex.
Yeah, exciting.
So exciting, though. My gosh, I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Anything else that you want to add? What can we do to kind of move this thing along, to move this whole cannabis legalization wave along? As nurses or healthcare professionals, or as just people who are really interested in seeing this thing, be where it should be, and that is legal across the board. What are some of the things you think we can do?
Well, the best advice that I got early on was to act local and think global. And I think that still works, to really joining organizations. The American Cannabis Nurses Organization does provide you with that sort of support. And I really encourage, nurses to get out there locally in their community, see what's going on. Go to the city council meetings, go to their state assemblies and see what they're talking about, what bills they're passing around cannabis. And, and then get curious with your patients, ask them about what they're using. And, if they're using it, what are they using? How much are they using? Where are they getting it from? Is it a safe source? The more that we engage our patients, the more we're going to learn.
Right.
That's most of my information is through my patients and their willingness to share with me and be, a partner through this process and help me develop best practices. Yeah.
That collaboration. And there are a lot of people who have been using it for many, many, many years with good effect, for medical reasons, to feel better about that.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. I really, really, really am thankful that you joined me today on this podcast episode. And I love the work that you're doing. And, it's a brave new world and you're right at the forefront. And I'm so happy that you're out there leading the charge. I got a few questions.
Thank
I got
you.
deep questions with Nurse Mark to wrap things up here. Yay!
Okay.
So let's go. First question. If you could invite anyone to dinner, who would it be? Not living or dead. Whoever.
Gosh, I've thought about this, and I originally thought, well, I want to invite, Obama, Barack Obama, to dinner and ask him, why he didn't take more of a leadership opportunity to help legalize cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with, his leadership style is one that I admire. And I think that he, did so many positive things for our country. I know other people would probably disagree. But, I'd just love to hear from him what his challenges were and why he felt that wasn't a priority in his administration.
Interesting. I love it. All good questions, too. I wonder the same thing. Question number 2. Actually, if you get a chance and you do have them over, I'd love to get the feedback. I'd love to know the answer to that. What's your favorite quote?
Get them on your podcast, Mark.
Huh?
I said, get them on your podcast.
Yeah, that's right. I would if I could. You know what? I'm going to channel that. It's going out to the universe. I'm a huge believer in manifesting. So here we go. Barack Obama, if you're listening, I'd love to have you on my podcast. So second question, favorite quote?
I'm probably going to botch it, but there's the one by Gandhi that, first they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they join you. And that's certainly been my experience in the cannabis industry.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm going to steal that one. That's beautiful. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Make sure you look at that.
Yeah, I know. I know. So paraphrasing is fine. It's the intent behind it. And you got it. You nailed it. What's your most treasured memory?
Gosh, that's hard. I have so many of them. I would say right now it's probably around my kids and my family, and it's just sort of a bigger memory of just, having a family and having, 2 girls that get to grow up in a house where cannabis is normalized for them as a medicine. I'm really proud to provide them with that kind of, upbringing and engage them in conversations about it. And sometimes some really tough conversations about it. Those have been some of my favorite memories, is really being open about it.
Awesome. Awesome. And powerful. Changing the world one person at a time.
Yeah.
Next question.
I remember.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. You remember.
I remember when my youngest daughter realized that cannabis was marijuana. And
she didn't make the connection.
Didn't. She worked in cannabis. And ironically, it was on 420 that
oh my gosh,
because her older sister made some comment about 420 and marijuana. And she was my younger daughter was very upset. She actually started crying, and she looked at me and she said, "Mom, are you telling me that you use marijuana?" And I said, "Yes, honey." And she said, "You're going to die." And she ran crying, right?
Oh.
And, I brought her back and she's sobbing. And I said, what do you mean I'm going to die? And she said, "That's what they teach me in school, Mom, that marijuana kills."
Yeah.
And then I had that conversation with her that you're not getting accurate information. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you telling me that my school is lying to me?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am." And she said, "I am so confused."
As she should be. As she should be. You go through life saying, you know what? Trust your authorities. Trust that they know what they're doing. Listen to your teachers. Oh, and by the way, yeah, they're not really accurate in that one. It's the lay of the land. It's the way it is. I mean, and it's still, as you know, it's still prevalent out there, especially in the healthcare community. You still have people doing presentations about how bad cannabis is and how it's just not. I mean, they'll point to research that was, supported by the NIH, National Institute of Health, that had a negative outcome. Well, they funded mostly negative outcome research. So there you go. Stories of stories. They killed people in 1600s in Salem, Massachusetts, not far from where I'm at, because they were witches. They tried and executed women who were innocent because thought they were witches, and that was the story of the time. And, come to find out they weren't. Yeah. So, don't believe everything you hear.
Right.
Next one. If you found out you were going to die in the next year, what would you change about the way you're living today?
I'd quit working.
Yeah. That's the number one response, by the way. Oh.
Yeah. I love the work I'm doing. Yeah, it's exhausting, and I would go out and enjoy my family.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm with you. Exactly. What's the greatest accomplishment of your life? To date, because you have so many more that you're going to achieve that we don't even know about yet. What's the greatest one to date?
I would say it's my marriage. Having to navigate a relationship when I didn't have good role models growing up, and to build on that and make it something that I'm proud of today and that I cherish more than anything. I think so many of us want to give up when it gets hard. And I'm proud that I have a husband who wouldn't do that and taught me how to, be a better wife and how to be engaged in that relationship.
That is powerful. That is powerful right there. And you're right. Relationships are not easy. And if you didn't have good role models, when you were growing up, how are you going to know what to do? So to be able to navigate that is amazingly powerful. Congratulations. Congratulations on sticking with it and staying with it. Thank you again so much for being a guest. I really, really, really loved chatting with you today. And we'll have all of your contact info up on the show notes. But if you just want to throw out some contact info real quick, if anybody wants to contact you, learn more about Radicle Health curriculum and training, or just get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, you can reach us at www.radiclehealthcare.com. And there's a contact us button there, or you can send an email to info@radiclehealthcare.com, and we spell it RADICLE.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Love it. All right. Thanks again. That's it for the nurseMARK podcast episode. Come back again next week, and we will talk about health, happiness, cannabis. Thanks.